My name is Alejandro Roark, and I am the Executive Director for Hispanic Technology and Telecommunications Partnership. HTTP is a CEO roundtable of 16 of the country's oldest and largest Latino civil rights organizations who work in coalition to promote access, adoption, and the full utilization of technology and telecommunications resources by the Latino community across the United States. Through our community engagement, congressional education, and by serving as a national voice for Latinos in tech and telecom policy, HTTP member organizations work to support the social, political, and economic advancement of Americans of Latino descent by facilitating access to high-quality education, economic opportunity, and effective healthcare through the use of technology tools and resources. Foundational to our ability to create digital tools or culturally responsive digital skills education is and to shaping our public perception and shared understanding of our lives, experiences, and the contributions of, Black and Brown communities, is creating spaces and tables where we're all able to speak for ourselves and on our own terms and through our own unique prism that is colored by the way that we have experienced the world. So before we get started today, I wanted to invite all of our friends who are tuning in live from our website to please kind of join us on Twitter using the hashtag HTTP inclusion. Join the conversation. We'd love to kind of hear what's hitting your radar, and we'll be checking in on Twitter and social media throughout the dialogue, and have set aside some time for some questions towards the end of the program. So as we talk about this idea about the lack of representation in media, entertainment, and government, we know that it not only affects how others see us, but it also affects the way that we see ourselves. Today, I have the opportunity of sitting down with April Rain, creator and founder of Oscars So White; Lucy Flores, founder and former Nevada Assemblywoman and CEO of the Luz Collective; Alberto Vejilla, deputy director for the National Association for Latino Arts and Culture; Victor Dueñas, writer-producer for the feature film Bibi; and Ana Flores, who is the founder of We All Grow Latina, to share what they think, why representation is critical to our economy, for our society, and central to our program today, why it is a critical component if we are to achieve an inclusive tech future that serves everyone. So thank you all for taking the time again for being here with us today. We really appreciate your time and your efforts. So April, I kind of wanted to start with you because, your tweet, and your Oscars, hashtag Oscars So White, not only pointed out what many of us watching kind of know and understand, but it also sparked a national conversation, which actually led to structural reforms at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, including, reimagining of how they carry out their work and how they determine the composition of their membership. And in the words of the New York Times, hashtag Oscars So White rewrote the narrative in an industry with entrenched disparities and erupted like a bang, creating the conditions for a constellation of social movements from whitewashed out for Asian representation to Time's Up for gender parity that really intensified the media attention on the industry's treatment of historically marginalized groups. So April, do you mind kind of taking us all back to that moment, what you were thinking, what you were feeling, and from your vantage point, what the energy of that hashtag has created for diverse creators around the world?
Absolutely. And thank you to you, Alejandro, and HTTP for having me here today on this amazing panel. In January of 2015, I was still a practicing attorney, and I was practicing campaign finance law. I had absolutely no nexus to the entertainment industry other than I was an avid movie watcher, and so the Oscars were like my Super Bowl. There were special snacks involved. I would rope off the TV, so everybody knew this was mommy's night. And after the nominations came out, I would actually attempt to see all of the Best Picture and Best Actor and Best Actress films so that I could really talk my stuff afterwards and say who was wrong or, that something was well-deserved. So in that morning, January 2015, I was getting ready for work and I was down in my family room because one of the presenters of the nominations, the Oscar nominations that year, was Thor, Chris Hemsworth from the Avengers series. And I said, hey, Thor is going to be in a 3-piece suit. I need him on the biggest TV we have in the house in HD. So here I am putting on my skirt while sitting on the couch. And it struck me category after category, there were no people of color nominated in any of the acting categories. And let's remember, this is 20 slots. Best actress, best actor, best actress, best supporting actor, best supporting actress, 0. And this was the year that gave us Selma, that gave us Beyond the Lights. So it wasn't as if there weren't quality performances. And so I picked up my phone, being sarcastic, as I very often am on Twitter, and I said, "Oscar so white, they asked to touch my hair." And that was it. This was an organic thing. I was being snarky, and I went on to work. I checked in on Twitter around lunchtime, and the hashtag based on that one tweet was trending around the world. And then I had to figure out if I was going to continue this conversation that people were having, if I wanted to be the leader of whatever this thing was. And so one of the things I'll say to people is that, you have to choose. You have to choose if you're going to be the face of something when something may go unintentionally viral, or, there have been times when I've had tweets that I have intended to go viral, and they have. And then it's like, okay, well, what do you do with that momentum? Who do you talk to? What do you learn? What is your goal, right? And so one has to be prepared in determining, now that you've got the floor, what are you going to say, and what are your goals? And that's absolutely true with respect to tech policy. Once we get that opportunity to have a seat at the table or demand such, we need to make sure that we're ready to go with a plan, with an outcome. And so now what we see 6 years later, as you mentioned, the Academy made some changes. We can have an argument about whether they were actually worth anything. But what I think is more important is that people, consumers like you and me are being more savvy and intentional about our choices with respect to entertainment. And I think the same thing is happening in tech. We're realizing now that we have much more power, and we're thinking about how we're going to spend our hard-earned dollars, whether, post-pandemic, in an actual movie theater, or right now with streaming services. Same thing with tech, right? There's nobody that is doing it all by themselves. And so consumers realize that they have choices. And so those companies, the industries, the brands need to be thinking about how they are best representing the demographic that they want to reach, right? And that has to start at the top. You cannot have middle managers who are saying, yes, Black Lives Matter, Brown Lives Matter, we get it, we want to be on board. And then the C-suite is an incredibly homogenous group, typically of white men, who are not providing the support and the resources, meaning money, to actually make the changes that are necessary.
100%, and such a great way to kind of kick off this conversation. Lucy, I really would love to kind of engage your perspective because, we know that the nation's population is 40% non-white. Yet despite this kind of growing racial and ethnic diversity, Congress, entertainment media, and the tech workforce still lags the nation as a whole, and as someone who has served in elected office as the first Latina in the Nevada State Assembly, you have lead a digital platform at Me Too that engages Latino audiences through a Latino perspective. And now as the founder and CEO of the Luz Collective, I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself, your background, and really what drives your passion for promoting Latina visibility, social justice, and all things digital inclusion.
Yeah, no, thank you. First, before I jump into that, though, I just want to comment on April's comments. One of the reasons, and I can certainly speak for myself, that hashtag went viral is because it speaks to all of our experiences and like our very existence, right? Like something so simple as hashtag Oscar so white is like applicable to every aspect of our lives. And it was certainly applicable to my experience in politics. It continues to be applicable to digital media. It's applicable to the C-suites. It's applicable to literally kind of everything, right? Like that surrounds our existence, that is a part of being in America, being a person that's living in this country, a person of color, I should say, living in this country. So, from the very beginning, for me, identity has always been super critical and a part of everything that I do. When I first decided to run for office in Nevada, I very much ran as a Latina, as a young woman, as all of the identities that I bring to the table, not because I should be judged on those things, but because there is almost no representation at every moment that we look around. And so because we are so critically underrepresented, it's almost like we have to lead with our identity in order to make ourselves known in those spaces and to be those voices as loud as we possibly can for the rest of our community, which that in and of itself is this incredible burden that's placed on all of us, because now all of a sudden we're speaking for millions and millions of people, when in reality, we're not the official representative of every single Latina or every single Black woman or every single Latino in this country, right? And yet so often we feel that way. So, that has really been the crux of my experience and how I approached my leadership, whether it was in politics, heading into digital media at Me Too, and now as the founder of the Luz Collective. Every single space that I entered, I was either the first or one of a few in those spaces. And that's really what's been driving my leadership since day one, is that there's 60 million Latinos in this country. There's 30 million Latinas. And yet when you look around, where are our digital media platforms? Where are our movies that are centering our stories? Where are the C-suite leadership, et cetera? And so I think that, I can probably speak for everyone that drives us every single day. I mean, it certainly drives everything that I do in terms of getting to the answer to our solution, which is how do we get not diversity in media, but how do we get equity? How do we get, and it's not about equality either. This is equity. This is how are we being represented in a proportional way in every aspect of our lives. And for me, of course, media is one of the most important ways in which we can get to the representation problem, and that we can actually reach folks so that they can start to see themselves reflected in every aspect of our existence. So I'll leave it there. I didn't really, get to the whole, how did I get here? But really the answer of how did I get here was how do I just continue to drive forward to do as much as I, as one person, can humanly do to ensure that all of these faces that I'm seeing right now on this panel are faces that I see everywhere at all times, because that's what this country is.
100%. And I think both in your remarks and I think in April's remark, we kind of have this theme of, you don't have to set out to make a change. You don't have to, run for office or engage in a conversation because you want to be the leader or the one, right? I think that, for us, just doing it because we want to, because we have that personal ambition, because we want to contribute to our communities, which is often so true for Black and Brown communities. And just our personal success and us being there and making space at these tables for other people has that kind of ripple effect impact that I think drives us down, the path forward to greater inclusion and greater representation. And I'd love to kind of turn over to kind of Ana, because Ana, you're also kind of leading this representation revolution as the founder and CEO of We All Grow Latina, right? Which is the first network of Latina digital influencers, which you founded in 2010. And it has a mission to really kind of elevate the voices and the stories of Latinas via the power of community. And I just really want to say, I love everything about that. And I'd love to kind of hear, would you mind sharing a little bit about, maybe your personal background and what was the impetus for, establishing We All Grow Latina?
Well, yeah, this is actually our 10th year. As you said, it was 2010. So it still boggles my mind to say that, because what it started and what the path has been and where we are now has really been informed by our community. There was no way I could have dreamed 10 years ago that we would, that we would really be talking about what we're talking now and representing the communities that we represent, right? So I was born in Texas, and that's important. I was born in Texas my parents are from El Salvador. My mom moved back to El Salvador, so I grew up between both countries, visiting my dad in Texas every year. That really helped to form my identity, because, of course, I was always a Salvadoreña, but I was always at Salvadoreña living the experience in the US and this bicultural, bilingual person, right, where I didn't really feel I fit in, which is a lot of the narrative and a lot about Latinos feel. And when I not only that, but I was not the traditional person that wanted to do what in El Salvador was expected, which was to become a wife or, inherit something or, launching your business and all that wasn't really where you fit in. And I wanted to study media and television. So I moved back to the States and I did that. And I have always lived in creating content for Latinos. So I actually have never had a job where I'm not working with the Latinx community. It started with Univision and then MTV Latin America and Mexico, and then here with Mundos, which is now NBC Universo, until really always creating content, always talking to Latinos and creating content by and for us, but in the different perspectives of Latin America, and then creating content for US Hispanics, which we know is different, but that afforded me this bigger global view of how we identify, right? That as we all know here, and we've said a lot during Hispanic and Latinx Heritage Month, right, that we're not a monolithic group, that we're not a homogeneous group. But it's easy to say that, but then what does that mean? Especially if you're coming from digital media, if you're coming from brands, so you're trying to speak to all of these communities at once, right? And try to capture. So how do we talk in cultura? How do we create that? And I've been afforded through my life experience. I really feel that knowledge has just embedded in me. And when I became a mom and I had quit my job, and I love telling this part of the story because it is powerful. I quit my job and the recession came. I had no idea. And I was out of work because I had quit my job and my husband had lost everything too. But what I turned into was the digital space, blogs. This was 2008, 2009. The digital space, what's important about what tech has been able to do specifically for our communities was that it has been able to democratize our voices. Blogging did just that. It allowed a mom out of work, almost in food stamps, in LA, trying to survive in LA with no family around me, to be able to create a space where not only it became a community to me, but it became a community to those women around, of women that needed it as well, and parents, which was my blog. I was a mommy blogger, which was my blog called Spanglish Baby for parents raising bilingual and bicultural kids. So what I did was that I didn't have to do research. I didn't have to do data. I knew what I, as a Latina mom, needed, which was the resources for me that I wanted my daughter to stay connected to her roots and learn the language as I had done at an early age, right? And I wasn't finding those resources. So as many of us have done and continue to do, I created my own table. I knew how to create content that spoke to us and by us. So I just continued doing that and I didn't need money because thanks to the digital tools, I could create a blog with $10, right, to host a site and really just our experience. And that just grew. I became a well-known mommy blogger at the time, but that allowed me to open the door, right, to open the doors into these brands that wanted to learn more about how to reach Latina moms. Because we had to find a way, we were reaching ourselves, right? We were creating that community. And that just expanded then to what is now We All Grow, because I launched Latina Bloggers Connect, which was the first network connecting Latina bloggers with brands. And really, I didn't understand back then truly the impact of what I was creating, because for me, it was, I need to make sure that we can all continue doing this and using this space. And to do that, we need to monetize. And obviously, if I was going to go to anyone to try to raise funds 10 years ago as a mom blogger with the idea of trying to connect Latina bloggers and to allow us to continue sharing our stories, no one was opening the door for me. So I had to do it on my own. And I see Lucy like nodding because it's still hard to do that, right? It's still hard to convince anybody that our stories are valuable. And that community is valuable. And, we're starting to see more of that now because we're all at home and we're all having to use the digital space and we're all realizing the value of communities. And I hope that translates into actual investments, into actual funding for communities and for spaces that are really trying to speak to the communities in authentic ways. So, like I said, Latina Bloggers Connect 10 years ago. And later, a few years later, it became influencer marketing, the space that we had created, right? We became part of that influencer marketing engine, I'm trying to say, that was really run, that became so commoditized, that was run completely by tech, right, and algorithms. And then we realized when that started happening, we were at the top of our game, we were very successful, but we didn't want to turn into the algorithm machine and the commoditized machine of what influencer marketing had become. So we went back to our roots of community and elevating the voices and stories of Latinas and really focusing on community. So that was through in real life events, and now through the digital space, and creating representation in every space that we can, because we truly believe that we are what is moving forward the socioeconomic and the cultural movement in this country.
I mean, absolutely. I think that what you speak to is this idea that, you know, us as individuals, when we are connected to the internet, have the power to not only transform our lives, but to establish a community for those of us, you know, that might share like-minded interests. And I love and celebrate everything about that. You know, and I wanted to kind of keep the conversation going about kind of representation in media. And I wanted to kind of go to Victor. So Victor, you are, you know, one of the founders of a Latinx TV writers and directors group called Goals, so group of American Latinx screenwriters. You also co-wrote and directed the short film BBs, you know, which is, it was starring Academy Award nominee Adriana Barraza, which has been in an official selection of multiple Oscar qualifying film festivals, including LA Short Fest, the Austin Film Festival. And I think that the work that you also kind of, the wraparound support work that you created as a part of that film, right, which is a lot of your education materials, you know, led you to be recognized by a national civil rights organization, the Southern Poverty Center, as kind of like their centerpiece of its 2020 Teaching Tolerance campaign program. So I'd love to kind of hand the mic over to you and talk about what is it like being, you know, a Latino, a Mexican, you know, writer, right, in Hollywood, trying to get your foot in the door to really kind of get picked up to be able to tell, you know, authentic stories of our community.
Yeah, Alejandro, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And I'm a fan of everyone on this panel. So I'm just like a little kid at a candy store right now, just watching you all and listening to you. So thank you for the opportunity. The way that, you know, I came to entertainment and media was through education. I was a school teacher for 10 years, working at public schools here in LA. And what that afforded me was an opportunity to really work with students in underserved communities in sort of the ground roots level, right? I came from myself, having been raised in a working class suburb of here in LA called Southgate. I really understood what a lot of my students were going through, and parents and other fellow colleagues at the schools. So for me, when I left education, which was about 6 years ago, I really felt like I had a really good foundation of what I wanted to do with my voice in the medium of entertainment. I wanted to kind of take all the stories of my own experience of living in LA as a Mexican-American kid from immigrant parents, undocumented immigrant parents, being monolingual Spanish speakers, and me at the age of 5 being my own translator at parent-teacher conferences because there were no, you know, English Spanish speakers at the schools. That really informs a lot of what I write about, a lot of what I'm passionate about, and what I sort of wanted to bring to Hollywood. I got to be honest with you all that I was very naive of what I was stepping into, because in education, I really felt like I had teachers and principals and colleagues and parents and kids who had my back. So I was fortunate enough that my first opportunity to step into this foray of Hollywood came in the form of working on a show on Hulu called East Hills High. And it was the first Latino Latinx show that had a completely full Latinx writer's room. And with the exception of the showrunner, Carlos Portugal, and myself, it was a fully female-led room, Latina-led room. So for me, I had an incredible experience working with amazing Latinx writers who came from every part of the continent. And so I had a really great experience. That all came about because I had done a writers program that GLAAD had sponsored, where they were looking for Latinx screenwriters. And it just so happened that the instructor was Carlos Portugal, the showrunner. Our relationship continued, and that's how I got into that writer's room. But what I learned from that experience was how difficult it is to be a Latino Latinx writer in Hollywood. I mean, time after time, I would hear stories from my colleagues in the room about, how difficult it had been for them to get their foot in the door, or how to get that second experience. Once you're a writer, say a staff writer, which is the lowest level of a writer in Hollywood, that actually sometimes is the easier part. Getting that second opportunity and beyond is incredibly difficult for many. And part of the reason that's difficult is because, as April had spoken about, as well as Lucy, the hiring has to come at the top. The people that bring us into these shows, the showrunners or executives working at the networks and studios, have to be representative of who we are. They have to be representative of the Latinx community in order to understand what added value we bring to a room, or to a show, or to an opportunity that's presented to us. And if they don't, it's much more difficult for them to want to hire us. It seems that one of the difficulties of having more executive producers who are Latinx, Latino, is the fact that we are constantly repeating that same sort of lower levels. So one of the things that I'm very proud of is the fact that yesterday, a group of writers and show creators, producers, put out an open letter to Hollywood, and that was the hashtag End Latin Exclusion letter that was picked up by the LA Times and has run in Deadline, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, and every other publication in town, which is calling for the end of the erasure of our community within, writers' room, within the higher ranks of the executive ranks of studios and networks. And then I think it speaks to everything that we're talking about right now, because as a population, we in the US represent over 18% of the US population, but we're only represented by 4.7% of feature writers in Hollywood and 8.7% of TV writers. That's a disproportional amount to our population. And what was said before, which is all we're looking for is equality, and a level playing field with what is proportional to our population is what we're asking for. So I think that I come to it with a hunger to sort of change that. Maybe partly, that's sort of, again, what I talk about, that naivete that I come from a si se puede, educational background where I'm not ready to give up, and I'm more hungry than ever to sort of change things and create spaces for us. And by me creating a short that has gotten some very good attention and has, one of the things that I'm most proud of is that this short that Southern Poverty Law Center has made available to educators and students is that now I have access to really make a difference and really change the narrative that is being sort of shown in classrooms and beyond. And we want to do the same in network TV, in streaming TV, on Netflix, where the eyeballs, not only of our people, but minorities and the general population in general is watching and paying attention. And that's really where, that support for our communities comes from. And so I thank you for what we're talking about today, because it all representation is essential to changing the narrative.
100%. And so, Alberto, I kind of want to go to you because, we're talking about the arts. We're talking about culture, which we know has the transformative power of really kind of shaping our lives and our worldview. And you specifically work as the Deputy Director for the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture, whose mission really is to promote and connect and to cultivate Latino arts and artists and preserve the Latino culture across the country through art. And I'd love to kind of, and you being an artist yourself, I really kind of wanted to kind of provide some space for you to kind of talk about, what is it like to be, a Latino artist in the U.S. and what led you to this work, which, you really are one of the country's largest and most kind of dedicated funder of, arts and arts education, specifically when it comes to the Latino community.
Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you for hosting this conversation. I'm really glad to be in such a committed and brilliant company. I think you teed it up and you gave our mission for us. So if it's all right, I'd like to talk about the work of the organization and how we sort of conceive representation and why art matters. And then I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I think that what I want to share is, NALAC is what I like to call a full spectrum intermediary. We're a nonprofit organization. So the way that we fulfill the mission that you shared is really through membership-based work of a giant network of Latinx artists, cultural workers, administrators, lovers of art across the nation, Puerto Rico. Also, we have leadership programs that focus on developing arts leaders, arts advocates, and policymakers. And we're a partnership with some other organizations and Intercultural Leadership Institute. We've also got our grant making programs, which are, our standard program focuses on funding a diverse array of Latinx arts. We've also been recently dipping our toe into related to the COVID crisis. We've also got some really exciting programs that are focused on shifting the narrative around the border areas and also interrupting, challenging, transforming, racist systems as they show up in communities. So those are some of our grant making opportunities. And of course, we engage in research and advocacy. So I just kind of wanted to paint the full picture of what we do and who we serve. When we think about why representation, I think, is so important, I think of three key words. I think of the words accountability, abundance, and alchemy. And, I think that the common parlance, and when we talk about this type of work is, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And I think this is not a jab at the practitioners that are out there in that world, but I think that with 30 years of doing this work focused on the Latinx cultural arts field and all its diasporic diversity, that really, I think it's more about accountability and justice, right? I think that's where it starts. We're kind of, I think, evolving in some ways past the era of firsts. And so as Latinx cultural workers and lovers and supporters, it's really important that we have the conversations to achieve justice and accountability within our own community. And that includes, making sure that Indigenous and Black Latinx folks are, front and center in this work. So that way, it's truly accountable so that when we have an abundance in any, part of the sector, that we're really bringing our full beauty and power with us. We're not leaving folks behind, It's easy to see that, even amongst ourselves in spaces of Hispanic or Latinx leadership, there is colorism, there is our own unchecked colorism, bias, and racism in our communities that we are in a time where we can address. So that when we have abundance, it's actually genuine and meaningful where we move into these spaces. And then what I think is possible is alchemy. We can actually have real transformation. We might have a country that actually funds its, national arts at an adequate level. I'm pretty sure that, the city of Berlin's arts budget dwarfs, the NEA funding, and that's tragic. It's just a straight tragedy. So that when we get to that level of abundance, we have it grounded in some real genuine change. And I would say that as far as the importance of art and culture itself is that my notion is that it's where we as human beings, as community, where we make and produce meaning with one another. I think that, you asked a little bit about my pathway. I was a hip hop performing artist and a teaching artist prior to becoming, arts administration and a wonky policy person. And what struck me, then and now is that art is deeply personal. And culture is the most intimate space we really can share as human beings, and in some cases, some people are so socially or personally traumatized that doing a poem with them, writing a play, dancing, moving, that can be the medicine that they need to take care of their own basic needs. I think back to being a case manager and working with young people where they wouldn't be motivated to even show up to school, go to the collect food at our little food bank we had in the school site. What got them to that point was art and culture and that connection that's created. It paves the way for real transformation, So I think that that to me is that culture is the fuel that will drive us through that change of accountability and justice to abundance to alchemy, not just equity, diversity, and inclusion, but a real full spectrum of who we are and how we can show up in cultural spaces.
Thank you so much. And April, I kind of want to go back to you because, we've talked about a lot of different things kind of throughout our conversation today. We've talked about how, 92% of top film directors were men, right? 86% of top films were featured, white actors in leading roles, which is a pattern that has existed for decades, right? And that really hasn't caught the news cycle until we've all kind of begun to kind of speak up and speak out in digital spaces. We can also say that only 2 out of every 10 lead film actors, so 19%, were people of color in 2017, according to the UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report. So are there, from your perspective, some concrete steps that either Congress or the industry can take to ensure that there is greater representation at all levels and in all types of media?
Yes. And don't get me started. There are a myriad of things that can happen. Part of it is that we can no longer wait for the big studios, the Paramounts, the Universals, the 20th centuries to make this change, because what we know is that diversity and representation sell. And we can look at movies like Coco and Crazy Rich Asians and Black Panther as just some recent examples of how that's true. The more diverse a project is in entertainment or any industry, the more money it makes, especially if we're talking about both in front of and behind the camera. So those bigger studios who are not being more intentional with respect to inclusion are literally leaving money on the table at this point. And so what I think is really interesting is watching content creators, right? But in this case, we're talking about actors and producers and directors who are making their own tables, no longer waiting for a seat at the table at the bigger studios, but creating their own production companies. Obviously we have Ava DuVernay as the prototype with all of this. But we also have people like Michael B. Jordan, who created Outlier Society Productions, and others who are creating the art that they want to see for the audiences that they want to reach. And so, yes, absolutely. Studios can do more. Congress can do more. The inclusion rider is out there. That would be a great way to say, you know what? You're not going to get this funding, right? Because it all comes down to money. You're not going to get this funding unless you're intentional about who is in front of and behind the camera. And again, we're looking for quality individuals. This is not checking off a box to ensure that you've got, one queer person and one Latinx person and so on. This is about ensuring that there are more opportunities for traditionally underrepresented communities. A lot of the jobs behind the camera, the gaffers, the key grips, the production supervisors, are covered by a union. Well, you have to have so much experience on film before you can come into the union, right? But how do you get that experience if you can't get hired because you're not part of the union? And so Congress can work on some of those issues as well. There's a lot that can be done. These things could have happened decades ago. This didn't just start, 5 years ago with Oscar So White. But I'm encouraged by the fact that there are some who are taking this into their own hands and making concrete change.
That's awesome. So Anna and Lucy, I kind of want to go back to the two of you, as kind of April said, and I think as I remember, I think that all of us kind of on this panel are kind of probably similar-ish in age, and as I kind of look back or I rewatch kind of old favorites on Netflix, right? Shows like Friends or shows like, that I loved in the moment, I now look back and think, you live in New York, you work in fashion, you don't have any gay friends, you don't know any Puerto Ricans, like you never go to Harlem, right? And I'm just like, those are just things that we all kind of took for granted. And I think luckily, all of us speaking out right now and taking, the steering wheel into our own hands has kind of helped us kind of increase that level of representation. And we all know that kind of at this point, it's not even about asking for a seat at the table or for us being included. From my perspective, I think, having our voices represented is the missing link, right, to really supercharging the future of entertainment, the future of innovation, and to solving critical problems that our society and our country and our world is facing that can't be solved without our perspectives. So I think, in reaction to this conversation, I want to open the space for you guys to kind of react and see if there's, similar experiences that you've had throughout the course of your life that you want to kind of end our conversation with today.
Well, for me, I think one of the important things that April mentioned was this idea of pipeline. And one of the things, in the same way that we look at government internships, for example, and we see how little people of color end up on the Hill, mainly because those internships are unpaid and you have to get to DC and you have to figure out how to live there and how to support yourself. So who is that excluding when you put those parameters around the requirements in order to actually get that experience? That is the exact same thing that happens in all of media, whether it's Hollywood or whether it's digital media. And so, two things I want to mention. One, capital. It doesn't have to just be venture capital. We get it. These white folks work with each other. It's what they know, whether it's conscious bias or unconscious bias. I tell people I walk into a room and there's a 4-letter word on my forehead. It's called risk. They see me and they forget about every accomplishment I've ever had in my entire life, all of the obstacles that I've overcome, all of the statistics that I have beat, et cetera, et cetera. None of that is meaningful in any kind of way. If anything, I am the opposite of risk. I am a for sure bet. Because if I have managed to get through all of that, what do you think I'm going to do with this, right? But that's just not the perspective that they're working from. And so it's not just VC capital, but it's also SBA loans. It's all of the ways in which policy can invest in independent media that is people of color owned. And when we get that investment, we're able to turn that back around into our communities. One of the things that I did with Me Too is we launched from the ground, an accelerator program that didn't recruit. Specifically, we were intentional about not recruiting from USC's film school and, all of these Ivies. And because those kids, yes, there's Latino and Black kids there and Asian kids, but they probably have a little bit of a better network than that super talented kid at the community college, right? Who also has all of this amazing talent, but probably is not going to get that opportunity. So we were very intentional. We are now doing the same thing at Loose Collective. We're working with an organization called United We Dream. We have community content creators. We just expanded one of the videographers that we're working with, a 19-year-old kid, this Latino kid. Oh my God, like all of you all, I'm sure have seen, the immense amount of talent that's out there if only they get a chance. So those are the two things that I want to highlight. There are things that can be done about this. We can make changes to the way in which independent media is funded. And once we just have that little tiny bit, look at what we do with it and look at how we reinvest and build out that pipeline so that eventually they can have the experience to join the unions and to get into other digital media companies, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll leave it there. But there, this idea that this cannot be done or that we cannot build it ourselves is absolutely ludicrous. And we just got to keep being loud, and we just have to continue going out there and just doing the damn thing. That's all it is. I mean, that's probably the definition of our lives, right?
It's almost as if you batted it over to me, because that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, that's why Lucy and I can have an hour-long coffee every time we meet. And what I wanted to say is exactly that. Like, I am so tired, and I learned early on that I wasn't going to get that attention and that funding and that validation externally. And I believe passionately and wholeheartedly with my whole soul in the power of our communities. And it has taken a while, right, for the data to actually match that, because we've known that. I've known how powerful Latinas are before we had the first Latina report from Nielsen, and before all, because that was the first report that actually validated the work that we were doing, where it really spoke to the brands, to those are the gatekeepers that I work with, right, which are the brands and the media companies, et cetera. It's like, look at the power of the Latina community. Now we're looking at the power of the Latina community and the vote, right? And I am passionate about it. Black, brown communities, all the underrepresented communities, that we can create it ourselves, and that it's gonna be hard, but all the other alternatives end up us having to give it up to them, right? Because we are still the other in that sense. So VC money means you're giving up your company, right? There's all the other alternative, as Lucy was talking, because I am very, very much involved right now. Mostly our community is made up of entrepreneurs, right? And women trying to, and also to get into the C-suite, et cetera. And really it comes from that lack of representation, which means for us role models, which means for us mentors and sponsors that are going to open and guide the way for us. But if we're constantly being the first, and so much that we do, and I hope that for my daughter's generation, it's going to be completely different, but we have been the first in going to college, the first one in opening a business, right? The first one in building generational wealth, or whatever it may be. We are the only way we're able to access those resources has been by relying on each other, because we haven't seen it in media, because we haven't had the right books to read, because the publishing industry is also erasing us, or has been erasing us. And politics and finances, et cetera, across the board. So we are the ones that are creating those narratives. We are the ones that are writing those stories. We are the ones that are using our wallet power to invest in each other. And that's what we're seeing in the sense of entrepreneurship. We continue, even right now, right, that we are the communities, the Black and brown communities are the ones actually being affected the most by COVID in every sense. But businesses were the ones that are, especially women-owned businesses, are the one being closed at a much higher rate. Yet we have been, as Latinas, creating businesses at a 6 times higher rate than any other cohort for the last years. And we've done that without funding. We only have access, and again, going to VC, to less than 0.02% of the VC funds. We don't have access to SBA loans. The banks won't invest in us, et cetera. So imagine what would happen if the gatekeepers actually decided to invest in us, in our stories, in our products, and what we know that will sell, for lack of a better word, right? So we have to do it ourselves. We know that we have that economic power, and we're going to continue doing it. We have the cultural power. We're going to continue creating, and that's where I'm at. It is on us, and I completely trust and believe in us and the power that we have to yield that change.
Thank you so much for that. So Victor, I kind of want to end give you the opportunity to kind of do some kind of closing remarks. As somebody that kind of works in the writer's room, right? I remember when East Los High and Hulu happened, right? I am a Mexican immigrant, grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. I could not have a more different experience growing up than what was featured in East Los High. But when I heard about East Los High, when I saw that Hulu was there, I ran to the TV and the computer, and I watched every single season, right? And that, I think, just speaks to the fact that we all just are looking for a connection, a reflection of ourselves, and it gives us an opportunity to kind of learn from each other, right? What advice would you give to young writers or young content creators in Hollywood that are out there that have stories to tell, or maybe some advice that you would give a younger you?
Well, I think when you spoke about friends, for example, earlier on in the conversation, I just kept inside of me, kept going, because, when I was younger, again, talking about sort of what we saw on television that reflected us, it was, for Latinos, there was none. I was watching Friends, I was watching Saved by the Bell, I was watching Golden Girls. None of these characters and experiences that I saw, I looked like me, but I identified it from a very universal humanistic way. And so I think that I love the fact of where we are right now in terms of technology, because I would say to any person out there that has the yearning or has the capacity or interest in telling a story, whatever that story is, you have the power right here. This is a cell phone. This is a camera. This is the opportunity for you to create the kind of content and put it out in the world that you want. We don't have to wait, like you all said, for Hollywood to give us the approval, the permission to tell our stories. We have that availability right now. And once we do that, once we put out our stories in whatever way we want to, but by putting it up on social media, putting it up on YouTube, I think that is where we're able to sort of find others around the country and around the world who will understand and relate to those stories. So I really honestly hope that people listening and all those, aspiring filmmakers out there, anywhere in the U.S., that Latino, Latinx, African-American, Asian, that have that desire, but don't have, say, the pedigree or the experience or the connections to do it, know that you can. It's not an impossible task. Yes, it will. We don't have those exact doors open for us the same way. But if I could do it as a former school teacher who has absolutely no connections in Hollywood, and I was able to sort of really, honestly, I'll be honest with you, it was difficult. Many times I've cried by the lack of opportunities early on, but there are people that are out there that want to help us out. And once you find your tribe within the Hollywood community and band together, again, organizations in Hollywood like NALIP, the National Association of Latino Independent Producers, NHMC, National Hispanic Media Coalition, Nosotros, the oldest actors organization in Hollywood. All these organizations are out here to try to help Latinx, Latino community come together. And I honestly want to say that for me, one of the biggest things that I sort of the examples that I kind of draw from are all the experiences the African-American community have gone through. Because I feel like what folks like Tyler Perry, we could go down the list, the kinds of hurdles that they had to do to sort of create their own spaces for each other. Tyler Perry's working outside the Hollywood system. The man's a billionaire. So, it is possible to do this. And I feel like we need to band together and find those allies within our community, also within other communities of color that understand our own struggle in order to sort of, further our own position and access to those places at the table.
Wonderful. Well, April, Alberto, Ana, Lucy, Victor, thank you all.
Alejandro.
Great conversation for the work that you're leading. Please, for everybody tuning in, follow them on social media. I'll make sure to link their information in the video description below. Please also make sure to follow HTTP on our social channels at HTTP Policy to be the first to hear about our upcoming conversations presented as a part of this year's Digital Inclusion Summit. And until then, please remember to tune into the conversation, speak out, and stay connected because the future needs our help. So until next time, have a good one.